Imagine this. It's the coldest night of the year. The power grid crashes. Your home, your warm, modern, technologically advanced home, begins losing heat like a dying machine. Within 1 hour, the temperature inside drops to refrigerator levels. Pipes burst. Your phone dies. Your kids are shivering under every blanket you own. And suddenly, you realize something terrifying. Without electricity, without gas, without the system you depend on, your house can't protect you at all. Now, here's the twist. A medieval peasant, someone we love to imagine as primitive, filthy, half-frozen, living in the Dark Ages, would look at your situation and shrug. Because for them, a night at 40 degrees wasn't an emergency. It wasn't even unusual. It was simply winter. While we panic when the thermostat stops working, they had no thermostat to begin with. Yet they slept warm, cooked warm, lived warm, generation after generation. And they did it with no electricity, no synthetic fabrics, no insulation foam, no diesel trucks hauling firewood, no supermarkets stocked with calories. Just the land. Just knowledge. And systems so brilliantly engineered through centuries of trial and error that modern survival experts still struggle to match them. So, let me ask you something uncomfortable. If the grid went down tonight, could you survive even 24 hours? Because the truth is brutal. Modern society hasn't made us stronger. It has made us fragile. But those peasants? They were masters of heat, masters of food, masters of shelter. And today, you're about to learn the forgotten winter survival system that kept entire villages alive through blizzards that would empty a modern city in hours. This isn't nostalgia. This is a blueprint. And once you understand how they did it, you'll never look at winter the same way again. When winter arrived in the medieval world, the cold wasn't the only threat. It was hunger. Once the final harvest was gathered, the land essentially shut down. No fresh vegetables, no new meat unless you slaughtered something, no markets, no imports, no backups. A modern household might panic if the fridge stops running for more than 8 hours. A medieval family had to make an entire year's survival plan from a few frantic weeks of autumn abundance. And here's the astonishing part. They didn't just scrape by. They engineered a food system so efficient, so nutritionally dense and so scientifically sound that modern food scientists still marvel at how well it worked. This was the perpetual pantry, a winter-long food engine built from biology, chemistry, and pure necessity. Their first principle was simple. Water is the enemy. Water allows microorganisms to grow, and microorganisms mean rot. So, peasants removed water with a precision born from centuries of observation. When fruits, vegetables, and thin strips of meat were hung from rafters above the hearth, the gentle upward flow of warm air slowly drew out moisture. This wasn't random. The hearth acted as the medieval equivalent of a low, controlled dehydrator, slow, steady, and uniform. Modern research shows that properly dried foods retain up to 95% of their nutrients, and in some cases, like tomatoes, the nutrient density actually increases. Medieval people didn't know the biochemical mechanisms, but they knew the results. Food that stayed edible for months. Then came salting, one of humanity's oldest and most powerful preservation tools. Salt pulls moisture from meat through osmosis, creating an environment where bacteria simply cannot function. Vikings perfected this technique with 20-25% salt by weight, the exact ratio food scientists recommend today. A single, well-salted pig could feed a family of 5 for an entire quarter of the year. Salt wasn't just a seasoning. It was a survival tool as precious as fire. But medieval ingenuity didn't stop at simply keeping food not rotten. They developed fermentation systems that actively improved food. Cabbage mixed with salt created its own brine, allowing beneficial bacteria to convert sugars into lactic acid. This dropped the pH below 4.6, too acidic for dangerous microbes, but ideal for probiotics. Sauerkraut wasn't an accident. It was an engineered superfood. Modern clinical studies show that fermented vegetables strengthen immunity during winter by up to 25%. Medieval peasants probably never used the word microbiome, yet they nourished it daily. Fresh produce needed different tactics. Enter the root cellar, a masterpiece of passive temperature control. By digging below the frost line, peasants created natural refrigerators that maintained a steady 32-40 degrees all year. Root vegetables, carrots, turnips, potatoes, beets, were packed carefully in sand so they never touched. Why? Because one vegetable, releasing ethylene gas, can trigger rapid spoilage in its neighbors. Separation meant survival. In these subterranean chambers, food stayed crisp for 4 to 7 months without ice, electricity, or complex machinery. And let's be clear, none of this was improvised. These people calculated. They knew a family of 5 needed at least 3,000 calories per day, and they stocked winter accordingly, focusing on the most calorie-dense foods available. Rendered fat at 9 calories per gram, nuts at 6, dried meat at 4. A pound of tallow contained 4,000 calories. A pound of dried apples only 200. Their math wasn't written on paper, it was burned into cultural memory, retold each harvest as if it were scripture. Finally, they used confit, sealing cooked meat beneath a solid cap of hardened fat. The fat blocked oxygen completely, creating an airtight barrier where bacteria couldn't live. Properly done, this preserved meat for half a year, and unlike refrigeration, this method never failed during storms, blackouts, or bitter cold. To the medieval peasant, a storm wasn't a threat. It was simply the moment when their planning proved itself. The pantry wasn't a room, it was a system. Drying, salting, fermenting, sealing, calculating, storing. Each piece supported the others. And when the blizzard howled outside, families ate comfortably, not because they were lucky, but because they engineered their survival months in advance. Winter wasn't just a season in the medieval world. It was an engineering problem. And the people who survived it weren't lucky. They were experts in manipulating heat long before anyone understood the word thermodynamics. Modern homes rely on furnaces, insulation codes, and a perfectly functioning power grid. But the medieval peasant relied on something far more reliable: body heat, animals and architecture and fire, all integrated into a single survival machine. Let's begin with what historians call the living furnace. In a typical medieval household, the entire family slept together in one large bed. Today, we think of that as poverty or inconvenience. For them, it was physics. A single adult body generates roughly the same heat as a 100-watt bulb, insignificant alone, but transformative when multiplied. 5 sleepers under dense wool blankets create a warm pocket of air that resists the freezing world outside. Modern experiments prove this microclimate can hover comfortably around the mid-60s Fahrenheit even in a 40-degree room. The medieval family didn't just share a bed, they engineered a heat ecosystem. But humans weren't the only heat source. Livestock were living radiators. A cow can produce the equivalent heat of a small space heater running non-stop, and sheep contribute their own steady warmth. In many longhouses, these animals lived under the same roof during winter, separated by wooden partitions but sharing the same enclosed air volume. Their collective heat raised interior temperatures by 10 to 15 degrees. Yes, it smelled like a barn, but it also meant surviving the night. The architecture itself helped. Beds were elevated 2 or 3 feet off the ground because cold air sinks. Straw, packed beneath the sleeping platform and stuffed inside the mattress, trapped pockets of air that slowed heat loss. A well-built straw bed provided insulation comparable to modern materials. Nothing about medieval bedding was accidental. Every layer was a barrier between the sleeper and the deadly cold radiating from the earth. Now we turn to fire, the heart of winter survival. Open hearths looked impressive, but they wasted up to 90% of their heat. So medieval peasants changed strategy. Instead of trying to fill the house with flames, they stored heat. They placed dense stones, soapstone or granite, directly into the coals for hours. Once heated, these stones acted as thermal batteries. Wrapped in wool and placed at the foot of the bed or between sleepers, a single stone released gentle warmth throughout the entire night. This was slow-controlled radiation, the kind of heat modern campers rediscovered during power failures. And finally, there was the ash banking method, a masterpiece of low-tech engineering. Before bed, the fire wasn't extinguished, it was transformed. Coals were raked into a tight mound and buried beneath several inches of hardwood ash. The ash insulated the heat while choking oxygen flow, forcing the coals into a state of slow, steady smolder. By morning, the fire was still alive. A push of the ash, a breath of air, a handful of tinder, and flames returned instantly. This technique saved time, saved fuel, and guaranteed warmth in the morning. The medieval winter survival system wasn't luck. It was design. Heat came from bodies, animals, architecture, materials, and carefully managed fire, each element reinforcing the others. A system built not for comfort, but for resilience. To survive a medieval winter, warmth didn't come only from the fire or the house. It came from the body outward. The medieval peasant understood something modern people often forget. In brutal cold, your clothing becomes your home, and the landscape itself can become your ally. This is where two of the most ingenious survival systems emerge: the winter wardrobe engineered for insulation, and the shocking but brilliant practice of turning snow into a defensive thermal shield. Let's start with clothing, the medieval version of personal architecture. While we think layering is a modern outdoor concept, peasants perfected it centuries ago. Against the skin, they always wore linen. It seems counterintuitive because we associate linen with summer, but linen's wicking ability was its real power. By pulling moisture off the skin, it prevented dampness, and dampness is death in cold climates. Water conducts heat away from the body 25 times faster than air. A dry body is a warm body. Over the linen came wool, and not just one piece, a system of garments. Woolen tunic, overtunic, hose, hood, cloaks. Each thin layer trapped tiny pockets of air, creating multiple insulation zones. Wool's crimped fibers could absorb moisture without losing warmth, something cotton or down could never match. And the outer cloak? It wasn't just a dramatic medieval costume piece. It was engineered. Fulling, pounding the wool until fibers matted tightly, made the cloak denser, more windproof, and more water-resistant. Natural lanolin left in the wool created a hydrophobic shield that shed snow and light rain for hours. And the extremities weren't forgotten: fur-lined mittens, fat-treated leather boots, thick wool socks, hoods that sealed around the face. Everything focused on protecting the parts that lose heat fastest. Now for the part that feels like madness to the modern mind: using snow as insulation. Today, we shovel it away, push it aside, and curse at its presence. Medieval peasants looked at snow and saw an army of trapped air. Snow is 90 to 95% air, which makes it a surprisingly effective insulator. In the coldest regions, Scandinavia, the Alps, Eastern Europe, peasants deliberately banked snow against the outside walls of their homes, especially the north-facing side. They built up 2 to 3 feet of compacted snow, essentially wrapping the house in a frozen blanket. The science is simple but profound. Lightly compacted snow holds an insulation value comparable to modern fiberglass. By stacking it against the wall, peasants reduced heat loss dramatically. A packed snow barrier created a dead air space between the snow and the wooden wall, further increasing insulation. The result? Interior temperatures stabilized. Firewood was saved. The dwelling became a semi-igloo, a structure where the cold protected the warmth instead of destroying it. This was not an act of desperation. It was strategy. Snow was free, abundant, renewable, and perfectly suited for passive insulation. Where modern homes battle against nature, medieval peasants worked with it, turning the enemy into a collaborator. Put together, their clothing and their snow engineering form one truth. They didn't depend on a house to keep them warm. They built warmth everywhere they went. From the fibers touching their skin to the snow piled outside their walls, every layer was intentional survival design. When you step back and examine all these medieval techniques, food preservation, thermal bedding, communal heat, layered clothing, tallow, snow insulation, they don't look like isolated tricks anymore. They reveal something far more impressive. A fully integrated winter survival system designed by experience, refined by generations and held together not by machines, but by the logic of nature itself. Modern society tends to solve problems with single solutions. Cold home? Turn up the thermostat. Power outage? Wait for the grid to return. Frozen pipes? Call a technician. But the medieval world had no such luxuries. Their resilience came from creating a chain of interlocking solutions in which every element strengthened the others. Consider how their day began. They woke in a warm bed not because of central heating, but because the shared body heat, wool layers, straw insulation, and stored warmth from heated stones all worked together through the night. Their clothing didn't merely keep them warm, it trapped air, repelled moisture, and maintained a dry microenvironment close to the skin. Their homes didn't fight the cold alone. They borrowed heat from animals, used architecture to redirect airflow, and reinforced walls with snow when nature offered it. Their fire didn't need to be rebuilt every morning because ash banking kept coals alive. Their food didn't slowly rot in the cold season because they treated preservation as a calculated science, removing water, controlling bacteria, managing pH, sealing out oxygen. Everything was connected. Burning fat for calories warmed their bodies from within. The same fat waterproofed their boots and cloaks. The same fat lit their homes. The same fat protected their skin. Their home was a thermal ecosystem. Human heat feeding the space, animal heat supporting the structure, fire heat stored in stone, snow reinforcing the walls, and clothing managing the delicate balance between sweat and chill. If one part weakened, the others compensated. What makes this system extraordinary is that it required no electricity, no petroleum, no industrial infrastructure, no fragile supply chains. It depended only on materials the land provided: wood, wool, fat, ash, stone, snow, earth, and on the intimate knowledge of how each behaved in cold. Where we rely on instant solutions that collapse when a single link fails, medieval peasants created redundancy everywhere. If the fire died, the bed still kept them warm. If the clothing got damp, wool retained heat. If the food supplies dropped, fermented stores remained stable. Their survival wasn't a gamble, it was a design philosophy. And that philosophy holds a provocative message for us today. Resilience doesn't come from advanced technology. It comes from understanding your environment, mastering its materials, and building systems that support each other rather than depend on a single point of failure. Medieval peasants didn't dominate nature. They collaborated with it. And because of that collaboration, they endured winters that would cripple modern homes in a single night. When you step back and examine all these medieval techniques, food preservation, thermal bedding, communal heat, layered clothing, tallow, snow insulation, they don't look like isolated tricks anymore. They reveal something far more impressive: a fully integrated winter survival system designed by experience, refined by generations, and held together not by machines, but by the logic of nature itself. Modern society tends to solve problems with single solutions. Cold home? Turn up the thermostat. Power outage? Wait for the grid to return. Frozen pipes? Call a technician. But the medieval world had no such luxuries. Their resilience came from creating a chain of interlocking solutions in which every element strengthened the others. Consider how their day began. They woke in a warm bed, not because of central heating, but because the shared body heat, wool layers, straw insulation, and stored warmth from heated stones all worked together through the night. Their clothing didn't merely keep them warm, it trapped air, repelled moisture, and maintained a dry microenvironment close to the skin. Their homes didn't fight the cold alone. They borrowed heat from animals, used architecture to redirect airflow, and reinforced walls with snow when nature offered it. Their fire didn't need to be rebuilt every morning because ash banking kept coals alive. Their food didn't slowly rot in the cold season because they treated preservation as a calculated science, removing water, controlling bacteria, managing pH, sealing out oxygen. Everything was connected. Burning fat for calories warmed their bodies from within. The same fat waterproofed their boots and cloaks. The same fat lit their homes. The same fat protected their skin. Their home was a thermal ecosystem. Human heat feeding the space, animal heat supporting the structure, fire heat stored in stone, snow reinforcing the walls, and clothing managing the delicate balance between sweat and chill. If one part weakened, the others compensated. What makes this system extraordinary is that it required no electricity, no petroleum, no industrial infrastructure, no fragile supply chains. It depended only on materials the land provided: wood, wool, fat, ash, stone, snow, earth, and on the intimate knowledge of how each behaved in cold. Where we rely on instant solutions that collapse when a single link fails, medieval peasants created redundancy everywhere. If the fire died, the bed still kept them warm. If the clothing got damp, wool retained heat. If the food supplies dropped, fermented stores remained stable. Their survival wasn't a gamble, it was a design philosophy. And that philosophy holds a provocative message for us today. Resilience doesn't come from advanced technology. It comes from understanding your environment, mastering its materials, and building systems that support each other rather than depend on a single point of failure. Medieval peasants didn't dominate nature. They collaborated with it. And because of that collaboration, they endured winters that would cripple modern homes in a single night. When you look at the medieval winter through modern eyes, it feels almost unbelievable that ordinary peasants, people with no electricity, no modern insulation, no synthetic fabrics, no engineered heating systems, could survive temperatures that would cripple a modern home within hours. But that disbelief comes from one simple misunderstanding. We think survival comes from technology. They knew survival came from knowledge. And the deeper you study their winter strategies, the clearer it becomes that they weren't living in constant desperation. They were living inside systems they understood intimately, systems strengthened by the rhythm of nature, not threatened by it. Their mastery began with observation. They watched how food spoiled and discovered drying, salting, fermenting, sealing, storing below the frost line. They watched how fire behaved and learned to bank coals, heat stones, direct airflow, and use ash as both shield and insulation. They studied animals not just as food, but as physical heat sources that could sustain a home. They learned the physics of air, of moisture, of cold. They didn't need thermometers or charts to know that dry skin retains heat, wet skin kills, and straw traps warmth better than bare wood. And in this world without modern science, they engineered systems that modern science now validates. Their survival was not luck. It was literacy in the language of winter. And now the question turns to us. In a time when our comfort depends on fragile systems, power grids, gas lines, supply chains, thermostats, how resilient are we really? What happens when those systems fail, even briefly? The truth is uncomfortable. We have traded self-reliance for convenience. The medieval peasant, who we often imagine as backward or primitive, would look at our dependence on external systems and see vulnerability everywhere. They didn't rely on a constant stream of energy from distant sources. They relied on what they could understand, maintain, and renew themselves. This isn't a call to abandon modern life. It's a reminder that the wisdom of the past still applies, that knowing how to store food properly matters, that knowing how to maintain heat in your home without electricity matters, that understanding how your clothing works, how your skin protects you, how fire behaves, how materials hold warmth, these things don't make you old-fashioned, they make you resilient. So, as we close this journey into forgotten winter mastery, consider the deeper lesson. Winter has always tested humanity. What changed is not the cold, but our relationship to it. We built walls, thermostats, and systems of convenience, but in the process, we lost the practical literacy our ancestors carried in their bones. Maybe it's time to relearn it. Not because we expect disaster, but because knowledge that sustained people for 1,000 years is never outdated. It is wisdom carved from struggle, sharpened by necessity, and perfected by generations who didn't just survive winter, they understood it. And as we close this journey, remember this: medieval peasants didn't survive winter through luck or brute endurance. They survived because they understood their world. They knew how heat moved, how food spoiled, how snow insulated, how clothing breathed, how fire lived. Their systems weren't fancy, they were reliable. And when the cold pressed hardest, those simple, natural principles kept entire families alive. Today, we wrap ourselves in modern comfort and assume we're safer. But the moment the grid fails, many of us discover how fragile that comfort really is. The people we call primitive built resilience into every part of their lives. They didn't depend on technology. They depended on knowledge, the kind that still works, no matter what fails. So, as winter comes and goes, take this as a reminder. True security isn't about having more. It's about understanding more. And if these forgotten skills sparked something in you, stay with us. There's so much more wisdom waiting to be rediscovered.